Hello!
Hello, AOS fans!
It's the Agents of Sigmar.
And in this video, we're talking about Multipose
versus Monopose. Yes, Monopose versus Multipose. Which is better, basically?
Which is better, which is worse? Are they saying which do you prefer?
Yes.
We're gonna, I don't know, we particularly have a preference. We'll see as we go along.
I think, as with all things, especially in hobbies, which are an optional thing in life, which has no optimal best way of doing, these things always come down to taste.
Yeah, whichever you prefer. There you go, end of video.
There we are. Thank you very much for watching. Do like and subscribe, do ring the bell and give us a thumbs up, but we will start talking a little bit more about the actual topic now as well.
Yes, this came about, I think, from we have built some Kill Team figures in recent memory, and we have built some Dead Zone figures in recent memory, and the Kill Team figures are very much Monopose, and the Dead Zone figures were very much Multipose.
Yes. Now, before we go any further, just to clarify what we mean by Monopose, we don't mean those early 90s poses where you had 300 goblins, sword and shield, or spear and shield, or the old orc with the scimitar, shaver, and shield, or just the bow. They're all just, yeah, we don't mean that.
No, they're born out of that, I suppose.
Yeah,
but,
and they hold a special place in our hearts, I think, which we'll never ever really let go of, but
no,
that's not what we mean on this one.
No, absolutely. And I will almost certainly get multi and mono muddled up during this conversation, which I already have once. Okay then, Peter, how would you classify a modern Monopose model?
So I would say a modern Monopose model will generally have one stance to it, but there might be one or two different weapon options or something like that. So they might be able to hold a plasma gun or a melter gun, or you know, in AOS, they might have a great sword or they might have a great axe, but they're generally going to be in the same kind of pose, maybe with a slightly different helmet design or something like that.
Right, yeah, so you kind of basically, the pieces only go together in one way.
Pretty much.
But they might have different shaped pieces at the ends.
Yes.
Almost.
Ooh,
yeah.
Exactly, yes, exactly that. The overall pose of the model is going to be pretty much the same.
Yeah, okay.
And I guess that's one thing that counts against a Monopose kit, in that you're going to have a model, it's going to be aiming a gun, or it's going to be swinging a sword, or it's going to be jumping off of something. But that's it. You haven't got the option to say, actually, I don't want to be jumping off something, I want to be crouching down. Or...
Yeah, and I suppose also if you then bought a second kit, you'd have to have another one jumping off an almost identical piece of rock.
Exactly.
Which is perhaps a negative.
Yes, and that can be one downside to it, but I mean, I guess the question there is it really an actual downside? How many of that model are you going to have on the table all next to each other? You know, your general armies aren't going to be that big. And we are talking a lot about Games Workshop and 40k models here.
That's our experience, I suppose.
Yeah, but I think a lot of games, Underworlds is a good example in that it doesn't matter they're Monopose because you're only going to have one of each.
That's very true, and I was going to say, going out of Games Workshop, Marvel Crisis Protocol is the same, and you do get some really lovely dynamic poses across both of those games, and quite often on tactical rocks. I'm not quite sure what that's about.
Yeah, that is definitely, you mentioned that about tactical rocks, having them jumping over a piece of masonry, and that is one downside to the Monopose kit, in that not everybody needs to be leaping off of the...
Not every single... No. It doesn't have to be a small piece of debris around every single battlefield. I'm sure there is, but... Oh, I'm going to put my foot on this so I can jump off it. And I do love the dynamics. Dynamism.
The dynamisms.
That those kits can bring, particularly for your centerpiece models.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess in MCP, all the order models are kind of centerpiece models. So,
they kind of are a bit. But some are more centerpiece than others, like the Amazing Spider-Man, where he's falling off of that rig, which looks fantastic, but in game looks frankly ridiculous.
He's just carrying a piece of...
It's just carrying a whole rig of I don't know what it is around that he then decides to swing off.
You do have to suspend your belief a little bit more with the Monopose kits, I guess.
You definitely do. I think with your Multipose kits, you can just base them all on a nice green or, you know, concrete base or whatever your battlefield's going to be, but they can all just have 2 feet flat on the floor, and that's generally how 99% of your army's going to look.
I suppose the Monopose then, they serve the purpose in that the models look really cool.
Yeah, they really do.
And so that brings punters through the door. And games have changed a lot since we used to play, and you don't have rank and file anymore.
Yeah.
So you don't need people all standing in the same way.
Yes.
Because you're going to make them. Although I used to find some of the best well designed kits like that didn't all stand.
They all have to be angled as well.
Yeah.
They all have to be. They couldn't face the enemy. They had to sort of face that way a little bit.
Which kind of actually brings a point about the multipose kits. It's like, in theory, they're multipose, but in practice, you're often talking about fractions of a millimetre. Like there's a guy standing with a gun like that, or maybe with a gun like that, but he can't do this, or or crouch down, or because it is basically a pair of legs with a body and you stick some arms on. There isn't many other options.
And very often the arms are just two flat surfaces, so you've got a rotation around here, and that's basically all you've got. So you've got a lot of creativity within this...
Within 180 degrees.
Within
or you can put your arm on backwards.
Exactly.
Twist my arm behind my back.
And you might sit and think, oh, I'm going to do a Space Marine holding two guns because that'll be cool. But actually, none of the left arms were designed to hold a gun.
Yeah.
So they had like the thumb on top, so you had to try and cut the thumb off and then stick a gun on, which didn't look as good as the other arm that had the gun moulded on it. So one arm looked fine, the other one looked like some kind of...
Yeah, they are pretty much all right-handed often.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating. And even if you could do that, you wouldn't want all of your Space Marines running around like this.
No. And so, whilst you have multi-pose kits give you that flexibility, is it that much flexibility?
No, and I used to find with the less well-designed ones that if you weren't careful, like if you were doing a load, the ones you stuck first, in the meantime, while you were sticking the other ones, their arms slid slowly. Oh yeah, they fell forward, or their arms slid slowly downwards. So they had a shoulder, then a flat bit, and then the arm.
And then the arm would kick in.
Good at assembling, but yes.
And the other alternative was sometimes instead of doing just flat joints, they would do ball and socket joints. Like, there's all of this degree of motion, but actually it meant that they end up with shoulders that were way out further than they should actually be. And if you didn't get them within a very tight radius, they just had these weird
Or they had
bolts.
some sort of hypermobility syndrome.
Exactly. They just and they smashed the scenery everywhere. But yes, you ended up with this thing where you're like, I could put his arm back here. Like, well, you can, but it looks rubbish. And so that's definitely something which the multi-pose kits sort of offer you, but don't really in the grand scheme of things.
No, you end up, you might get a few different heads, I guess, but you end up with basically just slight variations of weapon. Again, I'll tell you what, you were talking about the shoulders not being right. Quite often the hands wouldn't be right because the guns would.
The gun would just sort of rest on this hand that was just like a massive plate.
Yeah, and I hate the kits, and I don't know whether this might apply to both. Actually, I hate the kits where the hand is on one part of the gun. Yeah. So if they're holding the gun in this hand, the other this hand is in the gun, and you have to you have to line it up.
The hand piece is actually modelled on, but the wrist joint and the hand just connect together on some flat surface, which has absolutely zero.
So if you don't get this arm at the right angle, when you come to glue this hand on, you can't do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because horrific. You often don't want to stick those pieces because you can't paint what's underneath, which is really frustrating. Which is one of the good things I do like about the Monopose kits. They've quite often got pegs, which means you can peg them in, take them off when you're painting, and then peg them back in and stick them if you want to at that point, and it all stays together, which is great for people who aren't that good at assembling like me, but also great for beginners. Yeah,
because there's no glue required. You can just sort of click all the bits together. Not all of the Monopose kits are designed to go without glue. Some of them do need glue still, but even then, the pieces just slot together right. They either have shaped divots or peg holes or whatever it is that just generally holds the arms in place. So if you do have to stick one arm holding a weapon and the other arm holding it, generally they'll just clip together.
Yeah, there aren't many kits that you can't, these days, that you can't get away with not sticking till you're finished.
Yes.
So they might be a bit loose, but they'll hold for painting or whatever, and the odd one, but then when you finish, you can then stick it together.
Yeah.
And then obviously like underworlds where they are specifically designed, they don't ever fall apart. In fact, sometimes you push them together and then you can't ever get them, get them back apart again.
Yeah. Yeah, there have definitely been some kits that I've assembled as push fit and then that's it, they never come apart again.
Just like, I didn't want to put that cloak on there yet because I can't get to the other underneath. No, I can't get it off without snapping all the pegs.
Yes. Now, one downside to Monopose, I think, is that the models can be insanely detailed and all the parts, and I find when I'm assembling them sometimes, you get this bit that's going over an arm and you're like, what's that bit? When you assemble it, you realise it's actually like a hair braid that comes down over the arm and up over the gun and wraps around the body and goes down the leg and flicks back up around again. You're like, I mean, that's a bit much.
I do really like that the Monopose kits are labelled, the modern ones anyway, enable the artists to really kind of use plastic as a medium for sculpting and really and depicting what's in the artwork as a picture. Like you have these amazing pictures, have always been amazing pictures, but they're, when you had the guy just standing like that, that's
They
not
never
really
quite look the same.
No, but now they're getting there. But it does have the flip side that actually, I'm not an artist, and therefore assembling that and painting that is quite hard work.
Yes, and another problem with it is obviously the multipose kits. They had to give you enough area to be able to stick these things together, so there was generally a good solid contact point. But on the monopose kits, MCP are particularly guilty of doing this as well, is that they've got like one thin ankle touching the floor, and that's all that keeps that
Just
model
because
there.
you can do it doesn't mean you should do it.
Yes, there's I think it's Storm in MCP. She literally is only held onto the base by a lightning bolt. And if you move the base, the model just wobbles back and forth. Like, did that need to happen?
It's like, how can she stand up? Oh, she doesn't need to stand up. She can levitate.
Exactly.
But how do I?
How am I going to paint this? So there is definitely a frustration there.
So painting then, I do sometimes feel like I'm painting a whole team of individuals.
Yeah.
Which is great on one level, but there was something to be said for batch painting. It's like literally, it's just like, going to go along here, I'm going to do the arm, I'm going to go along here, I'm going to do the trousers, I'm going to go along here and do the skin. There was something to be said for that. That was easier.
I'm going to quarter paint these Reichsguard or whatever, so but there's very little creative that has to go into it because they all just rank and file. And most of them are going to get taken off the board before they get into combat, so I don't need to get too attached to them.
I literally don't need to do the backs because my opponent will never see those.
Exactly, yeah. But now it's like, okay, I've got 10 Space Marines and every single one of them has, and GW are more guilty of this, I think, has a ton of detail involved that I've got to try and pick out, and that can be quite daunting.
Yeah, and so I mean, that said, batch painting lots of models is boring.
Yeah.
And if the detail, sometimes the detail isn't quite so good on those, or especially on the older kits, and that's partly a time thing. But I think because they have to be more flexible, they have less details on them. Sometimes you're painting it and you think, well, which bit's meant to be red?
Where does the tunic end and the trousers begin?
Yeah.
I do think some of it can be the fault of the creator. So GW in particular can be quite guilty of making insanely detailed monopose kits. The Krieg, for example, they looked really complex,
but they were okay to paint. And interestingly, this is kind of going off topic a little bit, but I've been painting the Middle Earth Strategy battle games, which are monopose mostly, and they're quite nice monopose kits because they just literally like most of the figure and an arm you stick on. It's not very complicated. But I've really noticed, I mean, some of those models are quite old now, 15, maybe 20 years old.
The detail's a bit soft.
And the detail is like, well, that's cloak, is that cloak or is that tunic? I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
And that's the real, so you can, but you don't, I know certainly in paint underworlds figures, you don't really ever get that problem.
No.
Where does that bit of detail in?
Yeah, and I guess people like with Marvel Crisis Protocol, for example, the models there are detailed enough that there's no guesswork involved in where does the thigh armour stop and the knee armour start or whatever. But they're certainly not boring and they're not soft on the detail. No. So they are detailed enough. They're true to the imagery from the comics or the films or whatever they've decided to base them off, but they're not lacking in detail. So it can definitely be a double-edged sword either way on that front, I think.
Definitely. One thing I have noticed or I have heard, and I don't really get into this side of the hobby myself, but a lot of people who moan about the monopose kits moan about conversions.
Yeah.
I can't convert my models to make them individual. Do you think that's fair?
I mean, I'd love to know how many people out there, and do let us know in the comments below if you're one of them, how many people actually do convert their kits. I know a lot of people like us who are like, I just want to stick the models together and play with my little toy plastic soldiers, and I don't want to have to think too much about the whole process.
I would love to be able to think about the whole process and convert, but I'm just terrible at it.
Yeah.
And so therefore, for me, a model that looks better out of the box is what I want. I don't, you know. But I mean, a lot of people. I know people do. We have people on our Patreon, Discord who do conversions. Sometimes it's swaps for models, but quite often, some of them do proper conversions.
Yeah.
But I don't really feel that it's a valid excuse. Not excuse is the wrong word, but I don't feel like it's a valid criticism that the monopose models are harder to convert. They're just different to convert, and there's so much stuff now. I mean, it can't be. I know. I'm comparing sort of chalk and cheese, but it can't be more difficult to convert a monopose plastic model than it can have been to convert back in the day a metal.
Yeah, a metal monopose model which had one optional plastic arm, which you could put in one of.
That can't be more difficult to do. I mean, green. There's some people do wizardry with green stuff and what have you. Well beyond me.
And not only that, I think anybody who, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I think anybody who's already into it enough that they're going to start converting.
Just getting a crack on that.
Yeah. Anybody who's going to start converting models already has the equipment and the skill needed to be able to start converting the multi-pose kits anyway. And they might be a bit fiddlier, but it's essentially the same kind of thing.
I think so. It's just an extension of the same skill set, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
So it's a bit difficult to completely comment, but I don't think that's a fair criticism of Monopose models.
No, I don't either. Another criticism, obviously, and I think we mentioned it right at the start very briefly, is that you might buy a pack of 10 models and you put them all together whichever way they go, and then you buy another pack of 10 because you want another tactical squad or whatever it might be, and then you put them together and suddenly you've got 2 sets of 10 people and they all look kind of the same. Now, GW and others have kind of, they've combated that a bit by saying, okay, actually you can put this model together this way with this gun, or kind of the same way but with a different gun, and that can change up a bit. And you can also paint them a bit different to make them look different enough. And I don't think that when you get them onto the table, it's really that noticeable if you have an army made up of Monopose.
I don't think so. And similar, but even as we've said, even if you have Multipose, they're basically the same anyway.
Yeah.
They don't actually look very much different.
Yeah.
And you just said something else there, which isn't in our notes, but you just reminded me when playing games with like Wysiwyg, I hate having too many options to do. It's like, you can give these 10 models, you can give them to choose 20 different weapons to put them on.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to commit when I don't know how to play the game.
Yeah. Or I literally have just picked the game up, and I just want to play it. I don't want to have to sit there for hours trying to work out what the optimum build is. And
exactly.
I know a lot of people are like that.
Possibly a whole separate video about Wysiwyg, but that for me, Kill Team, even Kill Team with its Monopose mostly models, was guilty of it. You commit. But if you're given 10 models and there's 10 ways to build them, and those 10 things are then in the rule book, that's fine.
Yeah.
When you're given 5 models, when you're given 10 models and there are 20 ways to build them and you don't know, then that starts to be a problem.
I mean, when Kill Team first came out, the number of posts on Facebook and such were like, what's the best loadout basic? What is the best set of ways to build them, And there were obviously problems with it where people were saying, oh, you can't build the plasma gunner and the flamer or whatever those things were because, they're based off the same thing. So people had to start making those choices when they probably shouldn't have had to make those choices.
No, and that's a different thing because you kind of don't have to make the choices, but if you want to play both, you can't do it, and that's a bit frustrating. But it is equally, I think, and again, this is probably a whole separate video. There's a whole competitive versus cool thing going on.
Definitely.
I
do think that the models over time have evolved and come sort of full circle in that they started Monopose because they didn't have
Can you evolve and come full circle?
Well, they evolved and then they devolved again back to, but I'm going to come on to how they've evolved but stayed the same in some ways.
Everything changes.
Everything changes, but
everything stays the same.
Yeah. So initially, in the beginning, there was light, and then there were Monopose models because they didn't have the technology to make anything better, and the rules encourage you to do whatever you like, so long as you convert it. Then technology got better, and we got Multipose kits, and the rules really led into the fact that you can build them with anything. You can have 5-man Terminator squad, and every single one of them can have a completely separate loadout. One can just be in his Y-France, if you like. And then they've started to change the rules back to a bit more of a formed sort of way of playing, in that you can have 5 Terminators and they all have pretty much these 2 weapons, and then one of them can have something else.
Yep.
And they've changed the kits back to more of a Monopose, so you do have just 5 Terminators, and most of them have the same thing, but one of them has a couple of different weapon options to represent that in the rules. And I just find it quite fun that they've made this big circle, and they come back around to Monopose, but a much posher version of Monopose.
Much prettier, nicer, more dynamic.
Yeah.
So I think probably, although we said we didn't have a favourite, I think we do prefer the less flexible but more pretty.
Yes. I think there'll always be a little space in many of our hearts where we were playing these games on the floor in our bedroom, or in the garage, or in the spare room on a bed with a board on it, or whatever we were doing, wherever we were playing this game with our friends, with 101 models all exactly the same shape. 101 Dalmatians, where do these dogs come from? With 101 models all the same shape, and we're always going to have fond memories of that. But if we right now got teleported back to then, and there were our younger selves going, look, isn't this cool? We go,
you could have this Necron.
not really. Have you seen this?
Yeah,
you know,
exactly, yeah.
Have you seen the latest Gargant or whatever it's called, or have you seen the Warhound
the
type?
giant models.
The giant models are. I mean,
compare with the old giants.
Yeah, I mean they're technically monopose, right? You know, you can't have them stepping forward with the other foot. You can't have the arms around the other way. But all the options you get on there
a work of art.
are fantastic, and you know, things change, like you said earlier. You know, everything changes, and I think that whilst the old multipose kits were great at the time, I think the new monopose kits now are just so much better.
Yeah. So there you go. That's what we think.
Yep.
What do you guys think? Are you super converters? Do you love to? Are you cash converters? Do you love to convert your models, and therefore you don't really mind what kind of model you've got because you're just going to hack it up anyway, or do you way prefer old school? I know a couple of our patrons often show old school models that they've got going on, or are you just like, give me the new stuff all the time?
Yeah.
Let us know what you think.
Yes. Do you find that having an army full of monopose models just fills you with boredom, and every time you see your opponent across the field, you sit there and go, oh, it's the same 10 pose Space Marines? Or do you sit there and think, excellent, I know exactly what my opponent's fielding and I don't have to keep asking inane questions?
Yeah, that is true. I mean, I would say arguably Space Marines have always looked the same and still look the same.
Yeah.
It's all about how you colour them in.
You've got your Vampire Space Marines, you've got your Viking Space Marines, you've got your Roman Space Marines.
You've got your Mongol Horde Marines.
Exactly. Then you've got your angry, spiky Space Marines, they're the Chaos ones, and they come in various flavours too. Yeah. So there you go. Let us know in the comments below what you think, monopose or multipose, which one wins for you.
Absolutely. So if you did enjoy this video, please like and subscribe, all that jazz, ring that bell so you get more notifications of when next time we're rambling on.
Yep. So we'll see you soon. Bye.